Hey, this is Scott, and today we're going to be taking a look at the image quality of the Canon RF 35mm f1.8 lens. So before we jump into the image quality here, I just want to quickly address something that I did mention in my previous video, which was a look at the actual build quality, the physical design, and the features of this lens. And if you want to see that, I'll link to it down below in the video description. And I mentioned in that video that this, of course, has a focus by wire focus ring. And that can make it difficult for things like manual focusing during video, getting those repetitive or predictable manual focus throws, or using it together with something like a follow focus. I said the reason for that is because the focus ring actually reacts to the speed that you turn it, meaning if you turn it faster or slower, the actual distance that your focus is going to change will be different depending on how fast you turn it. And I've noticed since then actually that you can, in the EOS R menu, go ahead and switch how it reacts, whether it reacts to speed or whether it reacts to the actual angle that you're turning it. And while switching that over can help, it is still a focus by wire lens, and it's not going to be as easy or as natural as a mechanical focus ring. So again, for focusing during video or using a follow focus, this is still not going to be your best choice. I've tested it out and it's better, but it's still not perfect. Just be aware of that if you're buying this, especially for video use. So now let's jump into the image quality. So first up, I'm going to take a look at sharpness, and I think there's kind of two situations here. It's going to be when you're really close up and shooting things that are going to have a shallower depth of field, or when you're shooting at infinity, when everything should be in focus, even wide open. So first up, let's take a look at some closer up pictures. This lens does have near macro focus, so you can see here, for example, that this at 1.8 is very, very sharp here. You can see a lot of details on this flower here, and it doesn't improve much when you stop down to f2, for example. There's really not much of a difference. If we take a look at both of those side by side, it's a very shallow depth of field, and I think that's going to be what you're dealing with. But the actual details that it resolves wide open are very, very clear and sharp, and you can get a lot of detail in your images, even when you're up close. I believe this was at as close as you could possibly focus, so this would be the closest to macro for this lens. When you look at something a little bit more of medium distance, if you back out, you can see this is not super close, but not super far. I was focusing right here on these letters, and they're all very, very crisp and clear. This is again wide open. Let's grab a couple of these here, and you can see as I stop down, there's really not much of a change in the actual sharpness and how much you can see those letters there. I mean, if you can see a difference, then great for you, but I really cannot see any difference whatsoever. Just a quick reminder here, all of these images will be available for download for you to go ahead and take a look at yourself on your own computer screen in full resolution. So if you want to download those, go ahead and check the video description. I'll have a link for them right down there. Backing up a little bit, this is not quite super infinity just yet, but if we take a look at this photo, everything is relatively far, so this is wide open. And of course, on the main subject here, you can see a lot of detail there. There's not really any chromatic aberration around the edges of this building either, which is pretty nice. I don't see a whole lot on the trees, but as you go out towards the corner, there is a little bit more around these branches on the edges here, and you're losing a little bit of resolution, a little bit of sharpness there on the edges. And if we look at these wires, which are a little bit out of focus, this is an area where sometimes you can see a lot of chromatic aberration pop up, and there's a little bit of stuff going on here, but it's not extreme. And if you go down to the dark corners here, you can see that there is a little bit of loss in sharpness in the far corners, and some a little bit of aberration going on here with the bright areas, but it's nothing extreme. I've definitely seen far worse, and for wide open at 1.8 on a very affordable lens, I think this is a pretty good performance. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of these edges and corners just compared between this wide open and as you stop down a little bit here. In terms of sharpness, I think you can really start to see an improvement. Things start to clear up a bit around maybe f2.5 here in the details in the trees. The weirdness around these wires maybe takes a little bit longer to clear up, but when you're over here at f3.2, f2.8, you're seeing a lot of detail, and that aberration is not really causing you too many problems anymore. Taking one more look at a very wide shot, and at this point pretty much everything is going to be at infinity. I was focusing on this building right here, I believe, and again in the center you can see that everything is really resolving quite a lot of detail. Down here, as you start to move away, you can see a little bit of fringing here around this tree with the bright white building behind it. And a little bit over here on the edge of the building, and things are starting to get a little bit less sharp, I guess you could say, down here in the corners. and you know, some aberration, some fringing is starting to be a problem with that as well. You can see over here, again, these cherry blossoms are a little bit challenging in the far corners, but still I think this is, you know, more than enough detail for an image that's wide open. You're still getting a good amount of detail in these corners, so you know, it might not be absolute perfect, but it's not bad at all. Let's take a look at this aberration around the building and the trees here as we stop down a bit in some more larger stops here. We're not going to go bit by bit here. Again, all these images are going to be available for you, but you can see at 1.8 there is quite a lot of this fringing around here. The same story at f2. At f2.8 it's quite a lot better, but it's still not completely gone. When you get down to f4 though, it's pretty much cleared up, and at f5.6 there's absolutely no issue at all here. While we're on the topic of chromatic aberration, let's take a look at some, you know, typical black and white text here. This is actually under quite strong sun, so this is fairly contrasty despite the fact that it doesn't look all that contrasty. But you can see here when the image is in focus, there's not really any problem at all with that chromatic aberration. You might get a little bit actually of fringing right here on the edge of this frame as it goes a little bit out of focus or more closer to the edges. But towards the center, you're really not having a lot of trouble here. When it starts to go out of focus a little bit, there might be just a hint of green fringing around these letters over here in that transition zone. But back here, you're not really seeing much of an issue either. So overall, for sharpness and chromatic aberration, I think that you're going to get a very decent performance out of this. It's definitely not bad at all. On the edges or corners, it's not absolutely perfect, but again, for the price, you're getting a really great performance, and it's something that I think a lot of people are not going to even really notice in most cases. Really challenging situations, maybe when you want a very clear edge-to-edge image, it might show up just a little bit, but in most shooting situations, this is not going to be a problem whatsoever. So while we're looking at these series of shots, let's take a look at the vignetting here. And you can see there is some darkening in the corners when you're shooting wide open. And it's probably about one stop or just over one stop or so from what I can see from judging from, you know, the sky in the center of the image to at the corners is about a 1 or 1.5 stop difference in brightness there. But it's not anything overly significant. Again, I've seen worse even in more expensive lenses. So this is not anything I think you really should be worried about when you're shooting wide open. However, it does take a little bit to stop down. It's kind of hard to see in these images here, but if you take a look at a series of them, you can see in those corners that it does start to clear up right around here. It's going to be around 3.5 f4 or so when that vignette actually starts to clear up to the point that it doesn't clear up anymore. However, again, even wide open, I didn't really have any problems with it. This is something you could easily fix if you needed to. However, most people will use it as an artistic look anyway, so yeah, that's not bad. In terms of vignette performance, it's not that bad. So jumping into distortion here, you can see with these straight lines here that there's really not a whole lot of distortion. There's not zero, but there's really not much distortion at all. And I don't think it's ever going to really give you any problems. And it's not going to be anything that you couldn't fix in post if it is absolutely critical to have perfectly straight lines. But for just daily shooting, this is not going to be a problem whatsoever. Very decent distortion performance here. In terms of flare, there was no real significant difference that I could see with and without the hoods, and I think that overall contrast holds up pretty well. Colors and everything look nice when you're shooting into the sun. I could see a little bit of ghosting here and there when I was shooting video into the sun, but it looked nice and it wasn't really distracting. Overall, it's not flare free when you're shooting into the sun with it around the corners or the outside of your frame, but it's really not bad at all. When it does flare, I think that it looks pretty nice. The contrast and colors hold up nicely. And generally, I don't think flare is going to give you any problems. Now when it comes to image stabilization, I wanted to take a look at this in two ways, both for photo and video. And for video, I found that it does an okay job. If you're standing still, if you're moving around a little bit, panning or something like that, as long as you're careful, it's going to be a decent quality image stabilization. And I think you can get away with some shots like that handheld. However, if you're walking, it's really not going to do that great of a job at stabilizing your footage. So either in 1080p or 4K with the crop, if you're walking with this camera and trying to handhold it, it's not going to be that great. Of course, 35mm is going to be hard to handhold and walk with any lens, but again, it's not doing anything amazing here. It's not a miracle image stabilization. Again, the camera itself is pretty lightweight, so it's going to be hard to keep that stabilized as you're walking around, as you're moving around with any significant amount of motion. I found on the photo side of things, again, it's kind of the same story. This is a light camera and lens combination. It's going to be really tricky to actually stabilize any little shakes in that, and it's not necessarily the stabilization's fault, it's just physics. The lighter the camera is, the easier it is to actually shake it, so that image stabilization has to work harder. Here I found that I didn't get the amount of improvement that they claim you can get with this image stabilization when you test it against the 1/40th shutter speed that they typically recommend for something like a 35mm lens. I got maybe 3 or 4 stops improvement, but when I tested it against myself shooting without image stabilization, I got from that point compared to with the image stabilization turned on, probably more like a 2.5 or 3.5 stop improvement. So not huge, but still it will let you get some slower shutter speeds handheld when you need to with low light or whatever situation you're in. It's kind of a boring thing to show you all of those photos in this video, so if you want to download all of these photos and take a look at my hit and miss ratio for yourself, and maybe you're a little bit more of a harsh judge than I am on whether or not these photos are in focus, then you can do that again. Download those photos, take a look for yourself, and make your own judgments. I'll label everything so you can know what's with image stabilization and what's without. Generally speaking, I found 2.5 or 3.5 stops improvement from using IS compared to without it. Bokeh, whatever you call it. It's something that everybody loves and hates to talk about, but let's take a look quickly at some of these bokeh balls here. You can see that they're very clean inside, no onion ringing, no weirdness around the edges. As you stop down, they retain that quality. They're very clean, and if you stop down all the way to about f4 or f4.5 is where you can really start to see the shape of the aperture blades here. But still, they're very, very nice bokeh balls, I guess you could call them. Bokeh is a very subjective thing, but even when you look at some of these, photos here where there's a lot of busyness going on with branches and leaves and everything, the background out of focus area is very, very pleasing, very smooth, and the transition from that in focus to out of focus area, I think for me at least, is really, really nice, not distracting, not busy. I never noticed any busyness in any of my photos. Again, you can look through all of these here for yourself, but I never noticed anything overly busy going on, nothing distracting. All of it looked really, really great, whether there was a little bit of detail or a lot of detail in the background, even as you stop down. For me, everything really looked great. Talking about focus speed for a second, I didn't really put this to the test that much because honestly, from my few tests that I did, I felt like the camera itself is going to be the limiting factor here, not the lens. The lens held up with the camera as much as it could, and so this picture, for example, of my son running towards the camera as fast as he could, every shot that I took was right, pinpoint, sharp in focus. And again, I think that in this case, at least with the RF lens on the EOS R, the camera is going to be the limitation, not the lens. Everything was really, really pinpoint in focus from the start to the finish. No problem at all. So at a really great price, the Canon RF 35mm I think is a fantastic lens, both in build quality, design, and image quality. The one place that I think it falls short in physical build is the fact that it's a focus by wire lens, and I personally don't really like that. But it is what it is, and I can definitely live with it, especially since the autofocus is so great on the lens and the camera. In terms of image quality, yeah, there's a little bit of vignette, yeah, there's a little bit of drop in sharpness with a little bit of chromatic aberrations, sometimes in the corners and on the edges, but overall everything is really, really sharp. It holds up very, very well at absolute closest focus, which is, semi-macro, and just overall, I think the image looks great. It has a very nice, I guess you could say, bokeh. That's my personal opinion. And just, there's really not a whole lot to complain about in terms of image quality. So again, I didn't show you all of these photos in extreme detail. I wanted to just kind of talk about my findings here and provide the photos for you to really take a look at yourself and put them under the microscope, judge them with your own standards, your own expectations, and see what you think. But if you do have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those down below and I will do my best to get back to you. If you like this video, find it helpful, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to see more in the future. Hit that little bell icon to get notifications when new content is uploaded. As always, thank you for watching.